The air in the fourth-floor room of the Sabura Insula tasted of mould, stale sweat, and the ever-present tang of human waste that wafted up from the alley below. Livia, 22 years of hard Roman life, etched onto her wiry frame, blinked against the sliver of grey light that dared to pierce the grimy animal skin covering the window hole. Beside her, on the thin straw pallet they shared, her younger brother, Titus, coughed, a dry, rasping sound that twisted her insides with a familiar knot of fear. He was 8, small for his age, his breath already carrying Kenning Vicinti's endless sickness. She reached out, her calloused fingers gently brushing his matted dark hair from his forehead. His skin was cool, thank the gods. For now. "Easy, Titus," she whispered, her voice rough from sleep and disuse. "Just the morning air." A lie, of course. The morning air in the Sabura was a poison, slow and insidious. Livia rose, her joints creaking a protest. The floorboards beneath her bare feet were cold and sticky, with something she preferred not to identify. Their room was barely large enough for the two of them and the small clay pot in the corner that served as their chamber pot. It was nearly full. Another task for the morning. She pulled on her single tunic, a coarse woolen garment dyed a drab, indeterminate brown, its patches a testament to her mending skills and their poverty. The faded scar above her left eyebrow, a relic from a tumble down the insula's treacherous stairs in her youth, throbbed faintly as it often did when she was tired or worried. Which was always. Outside their flimsy door, the insula was already a symphony of misery and mundane survival. A baby wailed from the floor below. A man and woman were shouting in a dialect Livia barely understood, and the rhythmic thudding from above meant old Valerius was already at his cobbling, or perhaps just beating his wife. She ignored it all, her focus solely on Titus and the gnawing emptiness in her belly. Their breakfast, if it could be called that, was a sliver of yesterday's panis militaris, the hard, dark bread of soldiers and the poor, softened with a little water. Livia gave Titus the larger piece, watching him chew slowly, his grey eyes so like her own, fixed on her with a quiet trust that both warmed and terrified her. That trust was a heavy weight, a constant reminder of her responsibility. "Will you find work today, Livia?" Titus asked, his voice small. "Always, little mouse," she said, forcing a confidence she didn't feel. Rome always needs strong hands. Another lie. Rome needed cheap hands, disposable hands, and hers were getting warier by the day. Their meagre meal finished, Livia prepared for the ordeal of the latrine. The communal one at the end of their corridor was a foul, overflowing pit, but better than the alley, especially for a woman. The stench was a physical assault, but she performed her ablutions quickly, splashing her face with water from a cracked jug she'd filled at the public fountain the night before. The water already had a film on it. As she stepped back into the dim corridor, a shadow detached itself from the deeper gloom near the stairwell. Marcus. His burly frame filled the narrow space, his broken nose and small, cunning eyes fixing on her. He wore a slightly better tunic than most, a stolen bronze ring glinting on one thick finger. The air around him smelled of stale wine and menace. "Livia," he grunted, his voice like stones grinding together. "Just the woman I wanted to see." Livia's heart hammered against her ribs. She kept her expression carefully neutral. "Marcus, what do you want?" He smirked, a thoroughly unpleasant expression. "The usual sweet thing, and a little extra this week. Times are hard, even for men of business like myself." He gestured vaguely, as if his business of preying on the weak was a legitimate enterprise. 5 asses by week's end, for your protection. 5 asses. It might as well have been 5 gold ore. "That's too much, Marcus. You know I can't." His smirk vanished. He took a step closer, invading her space. "Can't or won't?" His gaze flickered towards her door, behind which Titus was waiting. "That little brother of yours, he's a scrawny thing, easily lost in this city, or sold." Ice trickled down Livia's spine. This was new. He'd threatened her before, but never Titus so directly. "Don't you dare talk about him." Marcus chuckled, a low, guttural sound. "Then find the coin, Livia. Or perhaps you could offer another service. I hear old Manius the Fuller needs a girl to sort his rags. Filthy work, but it pays." His eyes raked over her, insinuating. Livia felt sick. Manius was known for his wandering hands and worse. "I'll get your money," she said, her voice tight. "See that you do." He gave her another leer, then sauntered off, his heavy footsteps echoing down the crumbling stairs. Livia leaned against the damp wall, her legs trembling. 5 asses, and the veiled threat of Manius. The day had barely begun, and already it was a nightmare. She had to protect Titus. She had to. The thought was a burning coal in her chest, the only warmth in the cold dread that enveloped her. She took a shaky breath and pushed herself off the wall. First, find work. Any work. The docks were her best bet, hauling amphorae or scrubbing decks. It was back-breaking, but it paid something. Or perhaps the markets. Sometimes vendors needed an extra hand, especially if they were short due to sickness. Livia, Titus's small voice came from the doorway. He peered out, his eyes wide with a fear that mirrored her own. He'd heard. She forced a smile. It's nothing, Titus. Just a bit of Roman charm. She ruffled his hair. Stay inside. I'll be back later with something good. You'll see. She prayed to any god who might be listening that it wasn't another lie. The streets of the Suburra were a chaotic, churning river of humanity. The air, thick with the smoke of cooking fires, the reek of unemptied chamber pots, and the dust of crumbling brick assaulted her nostrils. Vendors screamed their wares, wilted vegetables, questionable fish, scraps of meat buzzing with flies. Children, half-naked and filthy, darted underfoot like rats. Mule carts, laden with goods, rumbled over the uneven cobblestones, their drivers cursing. Livia clutched the few denarii she had left, not even one as, in a small pouch tied beneath her tunic. She kept her eyes down, avoiding contact, her senses alert for pickpockets or worse. The faded scar above her eyebrow seemed to tingle, a premonition of trouble. She made her way towards the Emporium, the vast network of warehouses and docks lining the Tiber. The closer she got, the louder the noise, the thicker the crowds. Porters, their backs bent under enormous loads, jostled past her. The smell of stagnant river water, tar and foreign spices filled the air. At the docks, overseers with whips in hand bellowed orders. The work was brutal. She saw men and a few women straining to lift heavy sacks of grain, their faces slick with sweat. One man stumbled, dropping his load. The overseer's whip cracked, and the man cried out, scrambling to recover the spilled grain. Livia flinched but kept moving, looking for a foreman known to hire day labourers. Work? She asked a grizzled man with a scarred face and one blind eye, who seemed to be in charge of a gang unloading wine amphora. He looked her up and down, his gaze dismissive. Too scrawny. Need strong backs, not twigs. I'm stronger than I look, Livia insisted, trying to keep the desperation from her voice. And I work hard. He spat a stream of brownish liquid onto the ground. Everyone says that. Come back tomorrow. Maybe. Dejection settled heavily in her stomach. She turned away, the shouts and the stench of the docks pressing in on her. She had to find something. Marcus's threat echoed in her mind. She tried another gang, this one hauling timber. The foreman there, a younger, paunchier man, gave her a leering once over. Perhaps, if you're friendly. His eyes lingered on her tunic. Livia felt a surge of revulsion. She muttered a curse under her breath and walked away, her cheeks burning. The price of survival in Rome was often more than coin. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, beating down on the city, turning the narrow alleys into ovens. Livia's hope dwindled with each rejection. Her stomach ached with hunger, and her throat was parched. She saw a public fountain and pushed her way through the crowd to cup some water in her hands. It was tepid and tasted faintly of lead, but it was wet. As she drank, she noticed a commotion nearby. A group of vigils, Rome's firefighters and night watch, were dragging a young man from a bakery. He was protesting, his voice high with fear. I paid for the bread. Liar! Thief! One of the vigils shouted, striking him across the face with a leather-gloved hand. The baker stood in the doorway, wringing his hands, a mixture of fear and apology on his face. Livia watched, her heart cold. Justice in Rome was swift and brutal, especially for the poor. A false accusation, a moment of desperation, and your life could be ruined. She thought of the story her mother used to tell about their neighbour, falsely accused, his family cast out. The memory fueled her fear for Titus and her simmering anger at this city that devoured its own. She turned away from the grim scene, her resolve hardening. She couldn't give up. For Titus. Finally, late in the afternoon, her tunic sticking to her back with sweat, her feet aching, she found Drusilla at her usual spot near the Forumborium, selling dried herbs and small, suspiciously cheap amulets. Drusilla was an older woman, her face a road-map of wrinkles, her eyes sharp and knowing. She was cynical, her tongue often sharper than her wares, but Livia knew there was a core of something akin to kindness beneath the gruff exterior. "Still wandering, girl?" Drusilla rasped, not looking up from a bundle of wilted lavender she was trying to tie. "Thought you'd have starved or been sold by now." "Not yet," Livia said, trying for a light tone. "Any work today, Drusilla? Anything at all?" Drusilla finally looked up, her gaze assessing. "You look like something a cat dragged out of the Cloaca Maxima. What's wrong? More than usual, I mean." Livia hesitated, then the words spilled out. "Marcus, the 5 asses, the threat to Titus, Manius the fuller." She kept her voice low, conscious of the ever-present ears of the street. Drusilla listened, her expression unchanging. When Livia finished, the older woman was silent for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the distant, half-built monstrosity of the Emperor Vespasian's new amphitheatre, the one they were already calling the Colosseum. "Marcus is a festering boil on the arse of Rome," she said finally, "but he's a boil with teeth. 5 asses. That's a lot for a rat like him to demand from a mouse like you." "I know," Livia whispered. "But Titus," Drusilla grunted. She rummaged beneath her small stool and produced a small hard cheese and a piece of even harder bread. "Here, eat! Can't think on an empty stomach." Livia's eyes welled up. "Thank you, Drusilla. Don't thank me, it's probably off anyway." But her voice was a fraction softer. As Livia ate, ravenously, Drusilla watched her. "There might be something," she said slowly. "Risky, very risky, but the pay, it might be enough." Livia's head snapped up. "What is it?" "A man, not from around here. Wealthy by the look of his cloak, though he tries to hide it. He lost something. A small thing, a carved ivory die. Sentimental, he said. He was gambling down by the Insula Argentaria. Got drunk, got robbed, probably. He's offering 10 asses for its return. No questions asked. 10 asses. It was a fortune. Enough to pay Marcus and have something left over. But the Insula Argentaria district was a den of thieves, cutthroats and worse. And finding a single ivory die in that cesspool... "Why tell me?" Livia asked, her voice barely a breath. "Why not look for it yourself?" Drusilla snorted. "I'm too old and too noticeable. You, girl, you're small, quick. You can blend into the shadows, and you're desperate enough to be stupid or brave. Hard to tell the difference sometimes." She fixed Livia with a sharp look. "He's staying at a modest inn near the Temple of Portunus. Calls himself Corvus. He'll be there for 2 more days. If you find it, go to him. But be careful, Livia. Men like that, they don't get wealthy by being kind, and the kind of people who frequent those gambling dens." She didn't need to finish. Livia's mind raced. It was a long shot, a dangerous one. But what choice did she have? Manius the fuller, the thought made her skin crawl. And Titus. Where was he gambling, she asked, her voice low and determined. Drusilla described the alley, a notorious dice run behind a row of dilapidated tabernae. "May Fortuna piss on your enemies, girl," Drusilla said, a rare blessing. "You'll need it." Livia nodded, a knot of fear and desperate hope tightening in her chest. She had 2 days. 2 days to delve into the city's underbelly, to find a needle in a haystack of filth and danger, all for a chance to keep her brother safe. As the sun began to dip, casting long, menacing shadows across the Forumborium, Livia turned towards the darkening labyrinth of Rome, her small, wiry figure disappearing into the throng. The weight of the city, its indifference, its casual cruelty, pressed down on her, but beneath it a tiny spark of defiance, fueled by love, refused to be extinguished. The Insula Argentaria was even worse than Livia had imagined. The alleys were narrower, darker, the buildings leaning against each other as if exhausted by their own decay. The air was thick with the smell of cheap wine, stale urine, and something indefinably rotten. Rough-looking men with scarred faces and furtive eyes loitered in doorways, their gazes lingering on her in a way that made her skin prickle. Music. A discordant wail of a lyre and a drunken voice spilled from a nearby popina. Livia pulled her thin cloak tighter around herself, trying to appear insignificant, invisible. She found the alley Drusilla had described, a narrow slit between 2 crumbling insulae. The ground was littered with refuse, broken pottery, gnawed bones, filth, A few sputtering oil lamps cast an unreliable, flickering light. Even at this hour, a small group of men were huddled in a corner, their voices low and urgent as dice rattled. She watched them from the shadows for a long time, her heart pounding. They were a hard-looking bunch, their tunics stained, their faces brutalized by life or violence. This was where Corvus had lost his ivory dye. She scanned the filthy ground, her eyes straining in the dim light. It was an impossible task. The dye could be anywhere. Kicked into a drain, buried under a pile of refuse, pocketed by someone else hours ago. Forcing herself to move, Livia began her search. She kept to the edges of the alley, her hands sifting through the muck, trying to be unobtrusive. One of the gamblers, a mountain of a man with a shaved head and a cruel mouth, looked up, his eyes narrowing. "What's this? A rat come to nibble our scraps?" His companions laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Livia froze. "Just looking for something I dropped," she mumbled, her voice barely audible. "Dropped, eh?" The man stood up, looming over her. "What might a little rat like you have that's worth dropping in a place like this?" Livia's mind raced. She had to think fast. My brother. He's sick. I had a coin for medicine. I think it fell here." It was a weak lie, but it was all she had. The man grunted, unconvinced. He took a step closer. Livia braced herself. But then another of the gamblers, a wiry man with shifty eyes, said, "Leave her, Brutus. She's not worth the trouble. Let's get back to the game. My luck's about to turn." Brutus hesitated, then spat on the ground near Livia's feet. "Get out of here, rat, before I decide to step on you." Livia scrambled away, her heart hammering. She didn't dare go back into that specific alley while they were there. She spent the next few hours searching the surrounding gutters and refuse heaps, her hope dwindling with each fruitless handful of grime. The city was a monster, swallowing everything, every small hope, every precious thing. As dawn approached, grey and unforgiving, Livia gave up, her body aching, her spirit bruised. She hadn't found the dye. She trudged back towards her own insula, the weight of failure heavy on her. Titus would be waking soon. What would she tell him? She found him still asleep, his small face peaceful in the dim light. His cough seemed a little looser this morning. A small mercy. Livia gently stroked his hair. She wouldn't give up. Not yet. She still had one more day before Corvus left, one more day before Marcus's deadline. That day was a blur of renewed, desperate searching. She returned to the Insula Argentaria, timing her visits for when the gamblers were likely to be asleep or away. She poked through piles of stinking refuse, her hands raw, her stomach churning. She even braved the alley again, finding it empty, save for a sleeping drunk. Nothing. She expanded her search to the nearby streets, asking stallholders if anyone had found a small ivory dye. Most just laughed or shooed her away. One, a seller of cheap trinkets, offered to sell her a bone dye for a ridiculously high price. Despair began to set in, cold and numbing. She thought of Manius the Fuller, his leering face, his grasping hands. She thought of Titus, his innocent trust. The thought of failing him was unbearable. Late in the afternoon, exhausted and disheartened, she found herself near the edge of the district, where the alleys gave way to a slightly wider, though no less squalid street. A group of children were playing in the dirt, their laughter a jarring sound in the grim surroundings. They were throwing stones at a mangy dog that cowered under a broken cart. Livia was about to walk past when she saw it. One of the children, a girl no older than Titus, with tangled hair and a dirty face, was holding something small and white in her hand, tossing it up and catching it. An ivory dye. Livia's breath caught in her throat. Could it be? She approached the children slowly, trying not to startle them. "Hello," she said, her voice gentle. "That's a pretty toy you have there." The girl looked up, her eyes wary. She clutched the dye tighter. "It's mine. I found it." "Where did you find it?" Livia asked, trying to keep her voice calm. The girl pointed vaguely towards the warren of alleys. "Over there, near the smelly place where the men shout." Livia's heart leaped. It had to be it. "It's a very special dye," Livia said. "It belongs to a man who is very sad that he lost it. He needs it to bring him luck so he can buy food for his sick son." Another lie, but this one felt less poisonous. The girl's expression softened slightly. She looked at the dye, then back at Livia. "Is his son very sick?" "Yes," Livia said, her voice thick with an emotion that wasn't entirely feigned. She thought of Titus. "Very sick." The girl hesitated, then slowly held out the dye. Here, he can have it. Livia's hand trembled as she took it. It was small, cool, and intricately carved with the familiar pips. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked. "Thank you, you are a kind girl." She fumbled in her pouch for the few denarii she had left. It wasn't much, but it was all she had. She pressed them into the girl's hand. "For you, for being so kind." The girl's eyes widened. She clutched the coins and then, with a shy smile, darted off to join her friends, her brief moment of generosity already fading into the rough and tumble of their street life. Livia stared at the ivory die in her palm. It felt like a miracle, a tiny fragile piece of hope in a world designed to crush it. Now to find Corvus. The inn near the Temple of Portunus was slightly less dilapidated than the buildings in the Suburra, but only just. Livia asked the innkeeper, a fat, sweating man with suspicious eyes, for Corvus. "Third door on the left, upstairs," the innkeeper grunted, barely looking up from a tankard of wine. "And no trouble, or I'll have the vigiles on you." Livia climbed the rickety stairs, her heart pounding. She knocked on the third door. A voice from within, cultured and wary, said, "Who is it?" "I was told a man named Corvus was looking for something he lost," Livia said, her voice trembling slightly. "An ivory die." There was a pause, then the sound of a bolt being drawn. The door opened a crack, and a pair of sharp, intelligent eyes peered out. The man was older, perhaps in his 40s, his face lined, his hair streaked with grey. He was dressed in a simple, dark tunic, but the fabric was of a quality Livia had rarely seen up close. His hands, resting on the doorframe, were clean, his nails neatly trimmed. This was not a man of the Suburra. "You found it?" he asked, his voice low. Livia held out the die. Corvus's eyes widened slightly. He opened the door further and gestured for her to come in. The room was small and sparsely furnished, but cleaner than anything Livia was used to. A single oil lamp burned on a small table, casting flickering shadows. Corvus took the die, turning it over in his fingers. A faint smile touched his lips. "Remarkable. I never thought I'd see it again." He looked at Livia, his gaze piercing. "Where did you find it?" Livia quickly recounted her search, omitting the encounter with Brutus and focusing on finding the children. She didn't want to appear too desperate or too knowledgeable about the city's underbelly. Corvus listened intently. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "You are a resourceful girl and brave to venture into that part of the city." He reached into a pouch at his belt and drew out a small handful of coins. Livia's eyes widened. There were silver denarii among the copper asses. He counted out 10 asses and then, to her astonishment, added 2 silver denarii. "This is for your trouble," he said, pressing the coins into her hand, "and for your honesty." Livia stared at the money. It was more than she had dared to hope for. "Thank you, Dominus," she stammered. "Thank you." "The gods sometimes smile on the deserving," Corvus said, though his eyes held a hint of something unreadable, perhaps cynicism or a private sorrow. "Now go, and be careful. Rome is a dangerous place for a girl with silver in her pocket." Livia clutched the coins tightly, her heart soaring. She had done it. She could pay Marcus. Titus would be safe. She thanked Corvus again and hurried out of the inn, her mind already racing ahead. She had to get back to the Suburra, back to Titus. But first she sought out Drusilla. The old woman was packing up her meagre stall as dusk settled. "Well?" Drusilla asked, her voice sharp. Livia opened her hand, showing the coins. Drusilla's eyebrows shot up. "By Jupiter's stones! You actually found it?" Livia grinned, a rare, genuine smile that transformed her tired face. "I did," she quickly explained, then pressed one of the silver denarii into Drusilla's hand. "For your help and the cheese." Drusilla stared at the coin, then at Livia. For a moment, Livia thought the old woman might cry. Instead, Drusilla snorted. "Foolish girl, keep your money. You earned it." But she didn't push the coin back. "Just try not to get yourself killed spending it." Livia felt a warmth spread through her. "Thank you, Drusilla, for everything." "Get along with you," Drusilla grumbled, but there was a new respect in her eyes. Livia hurried back to her insula, her heart light despite her exhaustion. She found Titus huddled on their pallet, his eyes wide with worry. When he saw her, he ran to her, throwing his small arms around her legs. "You were gone so long," he cried. "I know, little mouse, but look." She showed him the remaining coins. "We're safe, for a little while at least." That night, for the first time in a long time, Livia slept without the gnawing fear of Marcus in her belly. She had faced the worst of the city, and for once she had won. The next morning, Livia waited for Marcus. She didn't have to wait long. He appeared in the corridor as she was about to leave, his usual smirk in place. "Well, Livia, have you been a good girl and earned your keep?" Livia met his gaze, her fear lessened by the weight of the coins in her pouch. She counted out 5 asses and held them out to him. "Here, your money." Marcus's smirk faltered. He took the coins, his eyes narrowing suspiciously. "Where did a little rat like you get this kind of coin?" "I worked for it," Livia said, her voice steady, "as you suggested." He grunted, clearly displeased that she had met his demand. He had probably been hoping she would fail, so he could escalate his threats or force her into Manius's clutches. "Don't get any ideas, girl," he snarled. "This doesn't mean you're special. You still live by my rules." "I understand," Livia said. But as Marcus turned and swaggered away, Livia felt a small, fierce surge of triumph. She had faced him down. She had protected Titus. The next few days were a brief respite. With the silver denarius she had left after paying Drusilla and Marcus, Livia was able to buy better food for Titus. A small piece of fish, some fresher bread, even a bruised apple. His cough began to ease, and a little colour returned to his cheeks. Livia even managed to find a few days of work mending fishing nets down by the river, the pay meagre, but enough to keep them from starving. But Rome was relentless. The city never slept, and its dangers were ever present. One evening, as Livia was returning to their insula, a commotion erupted in the alley below. Shouts, the sound of running feet, a cry of pain. Livia quickly pulled Titus into their room, barring the flimsy door. Later she learned that 2 rival gangs had clashed over territory. Marcus's small crew had been involved. There were injuries, arrests by the vigiles. For a few days, Marcus was nowhere to be seen. Livia allowed herself a sliver of hope that he might be gone for good. But such hopes were luxuries in the Suburra. A week later, Marcus was back, his face sporting a fresh cut and a fouler temper than usual. He seemed to have lost men, and his authority was diminished. He needed to reassert his dominance, and Livia, who had defied him once, was an easy target. He cornered her near the public fountain, his eyes glinting with malice. "Thought you were clever, didn't you, Livia?" He hissed, grabbing her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh like talons. "Paying me off, thinking you could just go about your business." "Let go of me, Marcus," Livia cried, trying to pull away. "Oh, I'll let you go," he sneered. "After you've learned a lesson, you and that little whelp of yours, I think it's time he started earning his keep. I know a man who pays well for nimble little fingers." The insinuation was vile, and Livia's blood ran cold. He was threatening to sell Titus into something far worse than she could imagine. This was it, the line she would not let him cross. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her, but with it came a surge of desperate primal rage. She would not let him take Titus. "No!" she screamed, and with a strength born of pure terror and love, she twisted out of his grasp, simultaneously kicking him hard in the shin. Marcus howled in pain and surprise, momentarily loosening his grip. Livia didn't hesitate. She turned and fled, her heart pounding like a war drum. "You'll pay for that, you little bitch!" Marcus roared after her, his voice echoing through the crowded street. "You can't hide from me!" Livia ran, blindly, desperately, pushing her way through the throngs of people, her only thought to get to Titus, to get him away. She burst into their room, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Titus, we have to go! Now!" Titus, his eyes wide with terror, didn't question. He grabbed her hand, and together they fled the insula, plunging into the labyrinthine alleys of the Suburra. Livia didn't know where they were going, only that they had to get away from Marcus, away from this place that had become a trap. She knew the Suburra like the back of her hand, its hidden passages, its crumbling shortcuts, its darkest corners. She used that knowledge now, twisting and turning through the maze, trying to shake off any pursuit. She could hear Marcus's shouts behind them, closer than she liked. He would have his cronies searching too. They ran until Titus was gasping for breath, his small legs unable to keep up. Livia scooped him up, her own lungs burning, and pushed on. She had to find somewhere to hide, somewhere Marcus wouldn't think to look. She remembered an abandoned shrine to some forgotten god, tucked away in a derelict section of the old Servian wall, a place even the rats seemed to avoid. It was a long shot, but it was all she had. They reached it as dusk was falling, the crumbling stones of the ancient wall casting long, eerie shadows. The shrine was little more than a niche in the wall, overgrown with weeds, the air within it cold and damp. But it was hidden. Livia gently set Titus down. He was trembling, his face pale. "Are we safe here, Livia?" he whispered. "For now, little mouse," she said, trying to sound reassuring. "We'll rest here, then we'll figure out what to do." But what could they do? They had no money, no food, nowhere to go. Marcus would be hunting them. The vast, indifferent city of Rome, which had once seemed a place of endless, if harsh, possibility, now felt like a closing fist. As darkness enveloped their hiding place, Livia held Titus close, listening to the distant sounds of the city, the rumble of carts, the shouts of late-night revelers, the barking of dogs. Each sound seemed a threat. She thought of Corvus, the ivory dye, the brief moment of hope. It felt like a lifetime ago. She had to think. Marcus was a creature of habit, his power confined to their small section of the Suburra. If they could get out of his territory, they might have a chance. But where would they go? Every district had its own dangers, its own predators. A desperate idea began to form in her mind. It was risky, reckless even. But it was better than waiting for Marcus to find them. The Vigilers. Marcus was a known troublemaker, a petty thug. If she could somehow draw their attention to his activities, not directly implicating herself, perhaps they would deal with him. The Vigils were often corrupt, but they also had a mandate to maintain order, however brutally, and a gang leader causing too much trouble, especially if it spilled into more respectable areas, might become a nuisance they'd be willing to remove. She remembered the baker, falsely accused, and the Vigil's swift action. What if Marcus was the one accused? It was a dangerous game. If it backfired, she and Titus would be in even greater peril. But what other choice did she have? As Titus finally drifted off to sleep, exhausted and afraid, Livia stared out at the distant glow of the city. The Colosseum, now nearly complete, loomed against the night sky, a symbol of Rome's power and its insatiable appetite for spectacle and control. She was a tiny, insignificant speck in its shadow. But she would not be broken. For Titus, she would find a way. She had to. The thought was a small, flickering flame in the overwhelming darkness. The next morning, Livia woke before dawn, her body stiff and cold, but her mind clear. She had a plan, fragile and dangerous as it was. She gently woke Titus. "We have to be very quiet, little mouse," she whispered, "and very brave." Her plan was simple in concept, terrifying in execution. She knew Marcus and his remaining cronies often used a deserted warehouse near the Tiber docks to store their acquisitions. Stolen goods, mostly. If she could somehow alert the Vigils to this stash and ensure Marcus was implicated, she needed a distraction, something to draw Marcus away from his usual haunts in the Suburra, long enough for the Vigils to discover his warehouse, and she needed to do it without being seen. She remembered Gaius, the quiet labourer from the construction site. He lived in a slightly less chaotic insula near the Aventine Hill. He had shown her small kindnesses. Perhaps he could help. It was a long shot. Why should he risk himself for her? Leaving Titus hidden in the abandoned shrine with a stern warning not to move, Livia slipped out into the pre-dawn gloom. The city was slowly stirring, the familiar sounds and smells already beginning to fill the air. She made her way carefully towards the Aventine, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and desperate resolve. She found Gaius as he was leaving for work, his rough tunic slung over his shoulder. He looked surprised to see her, his usual quiet demeanour tinged with concern. "Livia, what are you doing here? You look—" "I need your help, Gaius," she said, her voice low and urgent. She quickly explained her situation, the threat from Marcus, her desperate plan. She didn't embellish, didn't plead. She just laid out the facts, the stark reality of her desperation. Gaius listened, his brow furrowed. He was a man of few words, but Livia could see the struggle in his eyes. Helping her was dangerous. Marcus had a long reach, and informants were everywhere. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. Livia's hope began to dwindle. Then he looked at her, his gaze steady. "Marcus is a plague," he said, his voice rough. "He hurt my cousin once. Badly." He nodded slowly. "What do you need me to do?" Relief washed over Livia, so potent it almost buckled her knees. She quickly outlined her plan. Gaius was to approach one of Marcus's known associates, a weaselly man named Sextus. who was known to frequent a particular wine shop and feed him a convincing story that a wealthy merchant angry about a recent theft was offering a reward for information leading to the recovery of his goods that matched the description of what Marcus often hoarded. The merchant was supposedly meeting informants near the Forum Holitorium at mid-morning. The bait was that the reward was substantial enough to tempt Sextus into betraying Marcus, or at least luring Marcus himself to the meeting, away from the Suburra and his warehouse. "It has to be believable," Livia stressed. "Sextus is greedy, but not entirely stupid." Gaius nodded. "I know the type. I can do it." "While Marcus is away or distracted," Livia continued, "I need someone to make an anonymous report to the vigils about a warehouse near the docks being used to store stolen goods. Specifically mention Marcus's name." Gaius's eyes widened slightly. "That's the dangerous part. If they trace it back." "They won't," Livia said, though her heart hammered. "It has to be done carefully, a quickly scrawled message left where a patrol will find it, or a whispered word to a known informant for the Vigiles, someone who will pass it on for a small price." Gaius was silent again. Then he sighed. "Fortuna favours the bold, they say, or crushes them, all right, Livia? I'll help you with Sextus. The message to the Vigiles that you'll have to manage. It's too risky for me to be directly involved in that." Livia understood. He was already risking a great deal. "Thank you, Gaius, more than I can say." "Just be careful, Livia," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "Rome eats girls like you for breakfast." "Not this girl," Livia said, a spark of defiance in her eyes. "Not today." The plan was set in motion. Gaius, true to his word, managed to intercept Sextus. Livia, her heart in her throat, watched from a distance as the two men spoke, Gaius's gestures animated, Sextus's eyes gleaming with avarice. After a tense few minutes, Sextus hurried off, presumably to find Marcus. Now for Livia's part. She found a grimy child, one of the many urchins who scraped a living in the city's underbelly, and pressed her last few asses into his hand. "Take this to the Vigiles station near the Porta Trigemina," she instructed, handing him a small sealed piece of papyrus on which she had crudely scrawled a message about Marcus's warehouse and its illicit contents. "Drop it where someone will see it, then run. Don't let anyone see you." The child, his eyes wide at the sight of the coins, nodded eagerly and darted off. Livia then raced back to the abandoned shrine, her mind a whirlwind of hope and fear. Had she done enough? Had she made a fatal mistake? The hours crawled by. Livia and Titus huddled together, sharing the last of their stale bread. Every shout, every distant rumble of a cart sent a jolt of fear through Livia. Then, in the late afternoon, she heard it. The sound of marching feet, the clang of armor. A patrol of vigils was moving through the streets below, their voices loud and authoritative. Livia held her breath. Were they heading for the docks? Or was this just a routine patrol? She waited, her nerves stretched taut. An eternity seemed to pass. Then, faintly, she heard a commotion from the direction of the Tiber. Shouts, crashes, the unmistakable sounds of a raid. Her heart leaped. It was happening. She didn't dare leave their hiding place until well after dark. When she finally ventured out, the city seemed quieter, imbued with a nervous tension. She made her way cautiously towards her old insula, needing to know, to see. She found Drusilla at her usual spot, though she was packing up early. "Well, girl?" Drusilla asked, her voice hushed. "The whole Suburra is buzzing. They say the Vigils raided a warehouse down by the docks, found a mountain of stolen goods, and they arrested Marcus." Livia's knees went weak with relief. "Marcus? They got Marcus?" Drusilla nodded, a grim satisfaction in her eyes. "Caught him red-handed, apparently. Someone tipped them off. They say he tried to bribe his way out, but the officer in charge was one of the new ones, an uncorrupted sort. Or maybe Marcus just didn't offer enough." She shrugged. "Either way, he's gone. They'll probably send him to the mines, or worse." Livia felt a wave of dizziness. It had worked. Her desperate, reckless plan had actually worked. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Drusilla said, eyeing her shrewdly. "Or perhaps you know more about this than you're letting on." Livia just shook her head, a small, weary smile on her lips. Perhaps Fortuna finally decided to smile on the Suburra, Drusilla. "Perhaps," Drusilla conceded, "but Fortuna is a fickle bitch, don't trust her too much." Livia knew Drusilla was right. Marcus was gone, but the dangers of Rome remained. They still had no proper home, no steady income. But for tonight, for this one precious night, they were safe. She found Titus back at the shrine, asleep but restless. She gently woke him. "Come on, little mouse," she whispered. "It's over. We can go home." "Home?" Titus asked, his voice sleepy. "Yes, home," Livia said, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the word didn't taste like ash in her mouth. They returned to their small, squalid room in the insula. It was still cold, still damp, still reeked of poverty, but tonight it felt like a palace. Livia barred the door, a new, sturdier piece of wood she'd scavenged. She shared the last of her coins with Titus to buy a small honey cake from a nearby vendor, a rare treat. As Titus ate, his face alight with joy, Livia watched him, a fierce, protective love swelling in her chest. She had done it. She had faced down the monster, and she had won. But as she lay on their straw pallet that night, listening to Titus's quiet breathing, a sense of unease still lingered. Marcus was gone, but the system that had created him, the vast, indifferent machinery of Rome that ground the poor into dust, was still in place. There would always be another Marcus, another threat. The fight wasn't over. It would never be over. But Livia had learned something crucial. She was not just a victim. She had agency. She had courage. And she had Titus. As dawn broke over the 7 hills, casting its pale light on the sprawling, chaotic, magnificent and terrible city of Rome, Livia rose to face another day. Her body ached, her future was uncertain, but in her grey eyes there was a new light. A flicker of hard-won resilience, the enduring spirit of a survivor who had looked into the abyss and refused to fall. Rome was a monster, yes, but even monsters could be outsmarted. And Livia, the small, wiry girl from the Suburra, was just getting started. The city might try to devour her, but she would fight it every step of the way, for herself and for the small, sleeping boy who was her entire world. The unquiet dawn was just another beginning. The months that followed Marcus's arrest were a precarious balancing act for Livia. The Suburra, freed from his immediate tyranny, did not magically transform into a haven. New predators circled, smaller gangs vying for the scraps of power Marcus had left behind. But Livia, emboldened by her small victory, learned to navigate these shifting currents with a new wariness and a sharper instinct for survival. She found more regular, if still grueling, work. Sometimes it was at the fulleries, enduring the acrid stench of ammonia and the back-breaking labour of treading cloth, the memory of Manius, a constant, sickening reminder of what she had escaped. Other times she assisted Drusilla, whose respect for Livia had grown into a grudging affection. Drusilla taught her which herbs fetched a better price, how to haggle with the flint-hearted market vendors, and which officials were most easily bribed with a carefully placed copper as. Titus, too, began to thrive in the absence of Marcus's shadow. His cough lessened with the slightly better food Livia could now afford. A bit of cheese, some beans to add to their thin pulse, occasionally even a piece of fruit that wasn't entirely rotten. He started to explore the immediate vicinity of their insula, his natural curiosity blooming. Livia enrolled him, for a pittance, with an old, one-eyed grammaticus, who taught a handful of poor children their letters in a dusty cellar. It was a small investment, a fragile hope for a future slightly less bleak than her own present. Gaius became a quiet, steady presence in their lives. He would often share a piece of his meagre lunch with Livia if they found themselves working at the same construction site, the massive, ongoing project of the Flavian Amphitheatre, providing a constant, if dangerous, source of employment. They rarely spoke of Marcus or the events that had brought them together, but an unspoken bond of shared experience and mutual respect existed between them. Sometimes Livia would catch his eye across a dusty worksite, and a brief, understanding smile would pass between them, a fleeting moment of human connection in the dehumanizing grind of their labor. One sweltering summer afternoon, as Livia was hauling a basket of wet wool from the fuller's vats, her arms burning, her tunic soaked, she saw a familiar figure across the crowded street. Corvus. He was dressed as before in a simple but well-made dark tunic, his expression thoughtful as he observed the teeming life of the market. Livia hesitated. Part of her wanted to thank him again, to tell him how the coins he had given her had in a way saved their lives. But another part, a more cautious, Suburra-honed instinct, warned her to stay away. Men like Corvus, men of quiet wealth and unknown purpose, were best left undisturbed. Their worlds rarely intersected with hers without consequence. But Corvus saw her. His sharp eyes met hers, and a flicker of recognition, perhaps even amusement, crossed his face. He made a slight gesture, an invitation to approach. Livia, her heart suddenly pounding, wiped her wet hands on her tunic and crossed the street. "The girl from the inn," Corvus said, his voice calm amidst the market's din. "Fortuna still smiles upon you, I see." "Dominus," Livia said, inclining her head respectfully. I am well, thanks to your generosity." "Generosity is a rare commodity in Rome," Corvus observed, his gaze sweeping over the crowded market stalls, the beggars, the harried shoppers, "as is honesty." He looked back at Livia. "Tell me, girl, what do you do with your days now that you are not hunting for lost dice?" Livia briefly described her work, the foolery, assisting Drusilla, the struggle to provide for Titus. She didn't complain, didn't embellish. She simply stated the facts of her existence. Corvus listened intently, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he was silent for a moment. "You are resourceful," he said again, as he had before. "And you have a brother, you say?" "Yes, Dominus. Titus. He is learning his letters." A note of pride crept into Livia's voice. Corvus nodded slowly. "An education is a valuable thing, more valuable than many in this city realize." He paused, then said, "I have a task, a simple one, perhaps, but it requires discretion, and a certain familiarity with the less salubrious parts of this city. Drusilla recommended you. She said you were tenacious." Livia's heart quickened. Another task? More coins? But what would he ask of her? "What kind of task, Dominus?" "I need a message delivered," Corvus said, "to a certain individual, a man who prefers not to be easily found. The message is sensitive. It cannot fall into the wrong hands." He named a part of the Transtiberim, the rough, densely populated district across the river, an area even more notorious than the Suburra. Livia hesitated. The Transtiberim was dangerous territory, but the implied reward, the trust Corvus seemed to be placing in her, was tempting, and Drusilla had recommended her. That counted for something. I can be discreet, Dominus," she said. Corvus studied her for a long moment. "I believe you can," he said finally. He handed her a small, sealed papyrus scroll. "Deliver this to a man named Vitruvius, at the sign of the Broken Amphora, a taberna near the Pons Sublicius. Tell no one of your purpose. If you are successful, return to Drusilla's stall tomorrow at this time. She will have your payment." He named a sum that made Livia's breath catch in her throat. It was more than she earned in a month. "Be careful, Livia," Corvus added, his voice a shade softer. "The man you seek, he is not without enemies, and those who associate with him sometimes find themselves in complicated situations." Livia clutched the scroll, her mind racing. The danger was palpable, but so was the potential reward. This could mean a real change for her and Titus, a chance to move to a slightly better room, to buy him warmer clothes for the coming winter, perhaps even to save a little. "I understand, Dominus," she said. "I will not fail you." Corvus gave a curt nod. "See that you do not." He then turned and melted into the crowd, leaving Livia standing alone, the small scroll feeling like a burning coal in her hand. The journey to the Transtiberim was an ordeal in itself. The Pons Sublicius, the ancient wooden bridge spanning the Tiber, was thronged with people, carts and animals, a chaotic bottleneck of commerce and humanity. The Transtiberim itself was a maze of narrow, winding streets, even more dilapidated and squalid than the Suburra. The air was thick with the smell of tanneries, fish markets, and unwashed bodies. Livia kept her head down, her hand protectively on the scroll hidden beneath her tunic, her senses on high alert. She found the sign of the Broken Amphora, a dingy, ill-lit taberna tucked away in a narrow alley. The sounds of drunken laughter and angry shouts spilled from within. Livia took a deep breath and pushed open the door. The interior was smoky and crowded. Rough-looking men, sailors and labourers mostly, hunched over tables, drinking cheap wine. All conversation stopped as Livia entered, every eye turning towards her. She suddenly felt very small, very out of place. "I'm looking for a man named Vitruvius," she said, her voice louder and steadier than she felt. A large, scarred man behind the counter, presumably the proprietor, grunted. Never heard of him. Livia's heart sank. Had Corvus sent her on a fool's errand, or was this some kind of test? He is expecting a message, she persisted. A man at a nearby table, older, with intelligent, watchful eyes, spoke up. "Perhaps the girl means Vitruvius the scribe." Livia seized on the lifeline. "Yes, Vitruvius the scribe," the proprietor grunted again. "Back room, and don't cause any trouble." Livia hurried towards the back, relieved to escape the hostile stares. The back room was small and cluttered, filled with scrolls, tablets, and writing implements. A man sat at a small table, hunched over a papyrus, a stylus in his hand. He was thin and pale, with ink-stained fingers and spectacles perched on his nose, a rare and expensive item. This had to be Vitruvius. "Vitruvius?" Livia asked softly. The man looked up, his eyes magnified by the lenses. "Yes, what is it?" "I have a message for you," Livia said, holding out the scroll. "From Corvus." At the mention of Corvus's name, Vitruvius's expression changed. He quickly took the scroll, his eyes darting towards the door. He broke the seal and read the contents, his brow furrowed in concentration. Livia waited, her nerves on edge. The silence in the small room was thick with unspoken tension. When Vitruvius finished reading, he looked up at Livia, his eyes troubled. "This is unexpected," he murmured, more to himself than to her. He quickly re-rolled the scroll and tucked it into his tunic. "You have done well, girl. Tell Corvus. Tell him I will attend to the matter." "Is there a reply?" Livia asked. Vitruvius shook his head. "No reply. Just tell him I understand." He seemed preoccupied, his gaze distant. He fumbled in a pouch and produced a few asses. "For your trouble." Livia took the coins, a little disappointed. This was far less than Corvus had promised. But she had completed her task. She thanked Vitruvius and hurried out of the taberna, eager to leave the Transtiberim behind. The next day, Livia went to Drusilla's stall, her heart a mixture of hope and anxiety. Drusilla saw her approaching, and a rare smile touched her lips. "Well, well, the little messenger returns. Corvus was here. He left this for you." She handed Livia a small, surprisingly heavy pouch. Livia opened it. Her eyes widened. It was filled with silver denarii, far more than Corvus had initially promised. "But this is too much," Drusilla chuckled. "Apparently your message was well received, or perhaps Corvus is simply a man of his word and then some, a rare breed in this city." She winked. "Don't spend it all in one place, girl, or on one man." Livia clutched the pouch, a dizzying sense of relief and disbelief washing over her. This money, this could change everything. For a little while, at least. She could buy Titus a new tunic, one without patches. She could afford better food, perhaps even save a little for the harsh Roman winter that was fast approaching. She thanked Drusilla profusely, her heart overflowing. As she walked away, the weight of the silver in her hand felt like a shield against the city's harshness. For the first time, Livia allowed herself to dream, just a little, of a future that wasn't entirely defined by struggle and fear. A future where Titus might have a chance. But Rome, as always, had other plans. The city was a living, breathing entity, and its currents were unpredictable. The newfound security Livia felt was fragile, easily shattered. A few weeks later, a plague swept through the Suburra. It came on suddenly, as plagues often did, carried on the miasma of the overflowing sewers and the close-packed bodies of the insulae. People fell ill with fevers, coughs, and a wasting sickness that left them hollow-eyed and skeletal. The death carts became a common sight, their grim toll echoing through the narrow streets. Livia's blood ran cold with fear. She did everything she could to protect Titus, boiling their water, keeping their small room as clean as possible, avoiding crowded places. She bought expensive herbs from Drusilla, who claimed they could ward off the sickness, though even Drusilla's usual cynicism was tinged with a new anxiety. But the plague was indiscriminate. One morning, Titus woke with a fever, his small body trembling, his cough harsher than ever. Livia's world tilted on its axis. She nursed him day and night, her heart breaking with each rasped breath he took. She spent her precious silver on remedies that didn't work, on prayers to gods who seemed deaf to her pleas. Gaius brought her food, his face etched with worry. Drusilla came with poultices and bitter brews, her usual gruffness replaced by a gentle concern. But Titus grew weaker. Livia sat by his side, holding his small hot hand, whispering stories to him, trying to coax a smile from his pale lips. She remembered her own parents, lost to a similar sickness years ago. The thought of losing Titus, her little mouse, her reason for living, was an agony too profound to bear. One night, as a storm raged outside, mirroring the tempest in Livia's soul, Titus opened his eyes. He looked at Livia, a faint smile on his lips. "Don't cry, Livia," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "It's "It's all right." And then he was gone. Livia's world shattered. The grief was a physical blow, stealing her breath, crushing her spirit. She held Titus's small, still body, rocking him back and forth, her tears falling like rain on his cold face. The sounds of the insula, the city, faded away. There was only the silence, the emptiness, the unbearable weight of her loss. Drusilla and Gaius helped her with the arrangements. There was no money for a proper funeral, no family tomb. Titus was wrapped in a clean linen cloth Livia had hoarded, a small, smooth stone from the Tiber clutched in his hand, his favourite treasure. He was taken to one of the communal burial grounds outside the city walls, a place of anonymous graves and forgotten sorrows. Livia stood by the freshly turned earth, the scent of damp soil and decay filling her nostrils. The city of Rome, in all its grandeur and squalor, seemed to mock her with its indifference. What was the life of one small boy, one poor plebeian girl in the grand sweep of empire? Nothing, less than nothing. The days that followed were a blur of numb despair. Livia moved through her life like a ghost, the vibrant, resilient spark within her extinguished. The Suburra, once a place of struggle but also of fierce, determined life, now seemed only a landscape of pain and loss. Work was meaningless, food tasteless. Sleep offered no escape, only dreams of Titus's smile, his laughter, his small hand in hers. Drusilla tried to coax her back to life, bringing her food, offering her small tasks. Gaius watched her with a quiet, helpless sympathy. But Livia was lost in her grief, adrift in a sea of sorrow. One evening, as she sat alone in her empty room, the silence pressing in on her, she found the small pouch of silver Corvus had given her. She had forgotten about it in her grief. She opened it, the coins glinting dully in the lamplight. They felt cold, meaningless. What good was money now? What good was anything? She thought of Corvus. He had seemed a man of some understanding, perhaps even kindness, beneath his enigmatic exterior. He had lost something precious too, his ivory dye. Perhaps he would understand her loss. On an impulse, born more of despair than hope, Livia sought him out. She found him at the same inn, though it took several attempts. He seemed surprised to see her, his sharp eyes immediately noting the change in her, the hollowness in her gaze. "Girl," he said, his voice softer than before. "What has happened?" Livia told him. The words came haltingly at first, then in a flood of raw, unadulterated grief. She spoke of Titus, his sickness, his death, the crushing emptiness he had left behind. She didn't cry. She was beyond tears. Corvus listened patiently, his expression unreadable but not unkind. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. "I am sorry for your loss," he said finally, the words sounding inadequate, as such words always do. To lose a child, it is an unnatural grief. He paused, then added, "I too have known loss." His eyes held a distant sorrow that resonated with Livia's own. "What is the point, Dominus?" Livia whispered, her voice raw. "What is the point of struggling, of fighting, when it all ends like this, in dust and silence?" Corvus looked at her, his gaze piercing. "The point, Livia," he said slowly, "is that you did fight. You fought for him. You loved him. That is not nothing. That is everything." He leaned forward. "Grief is a shadow, Livia. It will walk with you for a long time, but you cannot let it consume you. Titus would not have wanted that." His words, simple as they were, seemed to penetrate the fog of Livia's despair. Titus. He would not have wanted her to give up. He would have wanted her to live, to find some meaning, some purpose, even in his absence. "What now?" Livia asked, her voice still hollow, but with a tiny flicker of something new, a question, a seeking. Corvus was silent for a moment, then he said, "I have a proposition for you, Livia. Not a task this time, but an offer. I am involved in certain enterprises that require intelligence, discretion, and a knowledge of this city's hidden currents. You possess all of these things, and you have courage, more courage than many men I know." He explained that he was part of a network, a group of individuals who worked in the shadows, gathering information, facilitating certain transactions, sometimes even righting small injustices that the formal legal system ignored. It was dangerous work, he warned, but it also offered a degree of protection and a purpose. "I need someone I can trust, Livia," he said, "someone who understands the value of loyalty and the price of survival. Someone who has nothing left to lose, perhaps, but also everything to gain." Livia listened, her mind slowly absorbing his words. A new path, A dangerous one, certainly. But perhaps it was a way to channel her grief, her anger, her resilience into something meaningful. A way to fight back against the indifference of Rome, not just for herself, but for others like her, for the forgotten, the downtrodden. "Why me?" she asked. Corvus smiled faintly. "Because, Livia, you found my lost dye. In a city of 1,000,000 souls, you found one small piece of ivory. That tells me something. It tells me you see things others miss. It tells me you do not give up easily." He paused. "And because I believe Titus would be proud of you." Titus. The name, the memory, was still a raw wound. But Corvus was right. Titus would have wanted her to be strong, to be brave. Livia looked at Corvus, her grey eyes meeting his. The hollowness was still there, but a new resolve was beginning to form within her. "What must I do?" she asked. Corvus smiled, a genuine smile this time. "First, Livia," he said, "you must learn to live again." And so Livia's new life began. It was a life lived in the shadows, a life of secrets and risks. She learned to move unseen through the city, to listen to whispers, to decipher codes, to anticipate danger. She became Corvus's eyes and ears in the Suburra, in the markets, in the crowded tenements where the underbelly of Rome festered and thrived. She still grieved for Titus. The ache of his absence would never truly leave her. But now her grief was not a paralyzing force, but a quiet fire that fueled her determination. She fought, not just for her own survival, but for the memory of her brother, and for the faint, flickering hope of a justice that Rome so often denied its most vulnerable citizens. She was no longer just Livia, the wiry girl from the insula. She was something more, a survivor, a shadow, a small, persistent thorn in the side of a vast and indifferent empire. And in the endless, unquiet heart of Rome, her story, like so many others, continued, unwritten, unheard, but undeniably real. The city would try to break her as it had tried before, but Livia would endure. She had to. For Titus. And now, for herself.